Hello and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, and there's a potential that you're watching this on video right now for the first time in our history. Hi, Justin. I can actually wave at you. This is crazy. I feel like we're in 2006.
I just want to reach out and touch you.
Right. Yes.
Touch the beard.
On today's show, we are going to be performing a few funerals. If you remember from last season, if you've been around for a little while, you know that Justin and I are professional funeral directors for National Hockey League teams that suck or that have slowly been eliminated. But these teams truly are the dumpster fire of the NHL. We are going to do funerals for the San Jose Sharks, the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Anaheim Ducks. All three teams intentionally rebuilding, and all three teams in the absolute basement of the NHL. Yes, all three teams reside in the Western Conference, but the Western Conference just has some garbage teams right now, and that's the pendulum swings back and forth, right? The high-end teams are the high-end teams, though, and that's what matters. So we're going to talk those teams. We're going to maybe break down a little bit what they might do at the trade deadline, and then we'll kind of get into teams that are actual buyers. There are teams that are in a playoff spot right now. Are they for real? Are they buyers? Are they just going to stand pat? So we're going to talk about our most likely teams to be buyers, and anything that happens along the way will be what it is.
I like it.
All right. Well, Justin, dealer's choice here. We're gonna which team would you like to perform the ceremony for?
Oh, let's start with probably, I guess, the team that I had the highest expectations out of the three of them. That would be the Anaheim Ducks.
All right. Do you remember where you had the Anaheim Ducks finishing in the Pacific Division?
Yeah, I think I had them at sixth place, I think where it was.
Okay.
Not the bottom feeders, but yeah.
Yeah, not bottom feeders, but not going to make the playoffs. They did have a little bit of a decent start to the regular season, and that has quickly come to an end. I think as we predicted that any success that they had maybe early would probably fall off because they just don't have the depth or the scoring ability or the defense. Like, they're just, the cupboards are not bare because they have a lot of really good prospects, but just many of them are not ready for the rigors of the everyday NHL to be high-end players yet. And of course, we most recently, I guess this works out perfectly that we talked the Ducks because they recently made a trade, and they trade Jamie Drysdale for Cutter Gauthier. Talk to me about what you thought about that trade. All the drama aside from Gauthier not wanting to play in Philadelphia, who cares? The guy doesn't want to play somewhere, whatever, that's fine. And I know Philadelphia fans, flip the guy the bird and boo him every game that he comes back to Philadelphia, but it is what it is. You got a great defenseman in return. What do you think about this deal for Anaheim with losing Drysdale and gaining Cutter?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you know what? A player, if they have the opportunity to say where they want to go, that's absolutely their right. And I don't care if you hate the team, love the team. That is your choice, right? So just like you and I, where we have the opportunity to quit jobs and go to a different company at any point we want, I think hockey players should be able to either or as well. But of course, with contracts, right, you have an obligation. And luckily for him, he did not have a contract. He was not obligated to stay with that franchise. So voiced his concern, went somewhere else. And so good on him for doing so now versus 3 years down the road when he's locked in and, gets, put on those 1 year arbitration deals and he can't go anywhere. So get it done now, out of the way.
Or that awkward, hey, by the way, I never planned on playing for you, and now I'm just going to wait out and play college. That sucks too. This is the best case scenario. You got someone who's ready to jump in, already playing in the lineup for someone who wasn't. So for me, it's a win for the Flyers because who can't use a potential very high-end defenseman? I'll take it all day. Now, it doesn't discount Gauthier at all, but
no. And for Anaheim, they have I mean, they have a nice stock of defensive prospects already. So it's not like this was an area of weakness for them as it was for Philadelphia, right? They were very weak on that right side. And so, when Ristolainen is your best right side defenseman, I think that kind of speaks volumes. And so, of course, now with, Philadelphia, I think it's a win-win for both teams. Philly gets a right-handed defenseman, a guy who, in my opinion, can be a top pairing defenseman for many, many years. And then, of course, for, obviously for Anaheim, right, they've had some struggles this year with Trevor Zegras not looking like that 60, 70-point guy they were hoping he was going to be. And Troy Terry is kind of, I don't want to say cooled off, but he hasn't, played with that same swagger he has the last couple of years when, really Frank Vetrano is your best player. That's kind of concerning. So
it's going to put you in the bottom quarter of the league, which it
right. Yeah, absolutely. And so for a team like Anaheim, that's, clearly on a rebuild and stocking the cupboards, right? They got a piece who I think can, next season step right in and make the team out of training camp and hopefully get an opportunity to play in this top six.
Yeah. And I think that when you look at what Anaheim is right now, hopefully they don't try to go and bring Gauthier in too early. I think some of the reason I think he was angry at the Flyers was that they may have. Oh shoot! I think my video just died. My camera is charging. Hold on.
Oh, that's too funny.
I'm gonna pause my end here. My camera is. That's strange. So apparently the charge that it's receiving isn't enough for it to keep powered.
But it's the USB?
Yeah. It's a USB-C. Should be enough to keep it powered.
Interesting.
That's very weird. But yeah, it just said died out. Well, I guess people are gonna see your face. Not mine.
Hey, I will say the nice thing is you actually have the nice Overtime Hockey Talk logo there.
Yes.
So that's a bonus.
I'll let it charge and then I'll just jump back in.
You're good. Let's keep rolling.
All right.
I love it.
All right. Yeah. So sorry, but okay, my video died. It's fine. This is first time doing video, so apparently I need to charge my camera because it won't stay charged from the USB-C. Great. Thanks, Sony. Nobody called me and told me that. Anyways, all right. So I think when it comes to Anaheim, when I look ahead, I go, there's two players that should absolutely be moved. It's Adam Henrique, Jakob Silfverberg. Like, let's finally make this happen. These two guys are not in the long-term plans. Henrique's 33 and so is Silfverberg. It's time to go cut bait. And, I think that there are teams that may be willing to give up a second-round pick for each of these players. Second, third, like similar, maybe even more if you start bidding more. And I think this is your opportunity to go and snag some decent prospects, decent draft picks, because they've got 2 seconds, 3/3, but only 1 first-round pick. So, maybe even somehow package those two, or Ilya Lyubushkin, who's also a UFA. There's many options for Anaheim at the deadline, and I think that it will behoove them to move all their UFAs. There's just no reason to keep them around. I don't think that they're going to be back next year, and I think that they could be good players on other teams as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think, Adam Henrique for me is the number one target on this team. He's a guy that, if you have, I don't want to say if you need a guy, but if you have depth concerns at the center position or even at the wing position, he's a guy that can slide in right in your middle six just perfectly. He can still skate. He can take draws. He can play a great two-way game, and he's still going to produce at a 40, 45-point pace throughout an 82-game season. So for me, this is a guy that I'll easily pay a second-round pick for. Especially if your team, like for example, Colorado, right? Who still, in my opinion, they still haven't really figured out if it's Johansson or Colton at that number 2 center spot. So Adam Henrique could be a guy who could come in and kind of, I guess be a Band-Aid if you want to call it that. Not that they really need a lot of help scoring, but this is a guy who I think can still produce, and still be a number 2 center on a team if you really are desperate enough to bring him in and you're still in that position to make the playoffs.
Yeah, or at least a guy who you can play throughout your top 9. he could play on some second lines. He could play on a third line. I think ideally Adam Henrique, if you're bringing him in, he's solidifying your second or third line, with the option of moving him up and down, see who he has chemistry with. I mean, you're rolling minimum 3 lines come playoff time. So it's okay if he can only go in and play the third line. He's almost a 50-point guy in Anaheim. I don't think that that's the clip he'd play at for a really good team. I think he's probably more like a 35 to 40-point player. But I mean, at least he's got the regular season experience. He did go to the Stanley Cup Finals with New Jersey in his rookie season, when New Jersey went to the finals and lost to LA in 2012. He had 13 points, 5 goals in 23 games, so he played pretty well. Unfortunately, he's only made the playoffs once, and it was the year that he was traded from the Devils to the Ducks. The Ducks were swept in the first round. So no points, -2. The last time that that was 17-18. So it's been 6 years since he was in the playoffs. So long time, only 27 playoff games to his name. But that's just more of a product of playing on, honestly, a lot of bad teams. Like, yes, he went to the finals with that Devils team, but he was on that Devils team another 5 years and they didn't make the playoffs. Goes to Anaheim, gets swept, and then another 5 years, 6 years now, of not making the playoffs. So kind of a rough go in that sense. So I guess he's relatively untested in the playoffs recently. Like, you maybe don't know what you're going to get, but my guess is you're going to get someone who's pretty hungry and who'd be pretty darn appreciative of being in the playoffs.
Yes, hungry is right. Absolutely. And another guy, right, you keep hearing thrown around all the time, John Gibson. He's another guy that I think Anaheim needs to get rid of at some point. But for me, I'm not looking to get rid of him at the deadline. I'm waiting till the offseason. When you get teams like, say, for example, New Jersey, right? He's been linked to that team for so long. Hopefully, they find a way to squeak in the playoffs, but not at the expense of the Red Wings. Let me just preference that. But, maybe.
That might be the only way they get in.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But maybe New Jersey makes the playoffs and they find out that, Vanacek and Smead or, Nico Dawes, they're not the answer in that, right? So now, teams that have a little bit more cap space open up, they're willing to pay a little bit more to bring in a guy like Gibson, who, in my opinion, I still think he's a top 15 goalie in this league, maybe not top 5 or top 10 anymore like he was for me a couple of years ago. But, he's kind of fallen off a little bit. But I do think a change of scenery is going to be good for a guy like this. And especially when you have, this is something all young rebuilding teams are really looking for is a goaltender. And they've got one in Lucas Dostal.
It's true. Yeah. And John Gibson, I agree, not a top 5 goalie, but does he have the potential for 25 games to be a top 5 goalie? I think he does. I think that he's in the same, maybe not career-wise, but I think he's in the same ilk as a Sergei Bobrovsky, where, is Bobrovsky phenomenal all the time in the regular season right now at this stage in his career? He was at some point. But no, I don't think you would. Like, you're not going to go and spend $10 million on him today. Now, back when the Florida Panthers signed him, he was probably worth it, maybe a little less, but I get it. To get him to come to Florida, you paid him, and that's fine. But I think same idea that, if he can get into the playoffs, hit a rhythm, John Gibson can get hot as anybody else. So, and we've seen really good stretches with him with Anaheim. So I think it's entirely possible that if he could get into the playoffs somewhere, albeit I don't think it's going to be this year, because that's just to carry $3.2 million for the next 3 years on your cap is not going to be ideal for the Ducks. So I would think they want to deal him in the offseason.
Yep, absolutely. And that's where they're going to get the most value out of him because, I don't really know where the goalie market is right now. I think it's kind of cooling off, and teams are obviously waiting till we get closer to the deadline. But you've got a lot of teams out there with 3 goalies. Your Detroit Red Wings, your Montreal Canadiens that are probably going to, jettison one goalie here or there. And, I don't think the value is there for a guy like John Gibson, right now, whereas, teams that are going to have to take on a lot of salary at this point, they're going to, probably want something else from Anaheim to make a move like that at this point.
To take him. Yeah. Well, and deadline. I just don't think it's going to happen, but that's there's still plenty of players to be moved for the Ducks. There's always Labushkin, Robert Hagg, there's Sam Carrick's a cheap UFA at the end of the year, and then of course Silverberg and Henrique. So they'll be pretty active, I think, at the trade deadline. Pat Verbeek will be pretty aggressive, I would assume. And the other side of this is that, hey, the Ducks did sign Alex Killorn. Do you think they signed Alex Killorn because they thought that he would make them worse? Absolutely not. So when you look at, I know he was injured a lot, like early on in the year too, and it hasn't been the smoothest sailing. Alex Killorn in Anaheim so far. I mean, 19 points in 34 games. It's not awful, but I think you were hoping for a little bit more from him. I just look at them and I go, I mean, they've done things that make them look like they're rebuilding. They also are doing things that clearly indicate that they think that they're going to be ready to go in maybe as soon as next year. That is where I wonder, do they ultimately move John Gibson if they think, hey, maybe we're like one or two more players away from actually being on that bubble and maybe be able to make the playoffs, in which case you may want John Gibson and Dostal, who Dostal has another year at his entry-level deal, $812,000. So it may not be the worst thing to have both guys going again next year in hopes that you're better and maybe competing for a playoff spot.
Yeah, and I mean, when I look at a guy like Alex Killorn too, right? You mentioned him in there. To me, he was brought in to be like that Nick Foligno type in Chicago, where you knew you weren't going to get the production that you signed him at in terms of dollar amounts, but what you were bringing him in is for that leadership quality he has, right? And Alex Killorn is a fantastic locker room guy, a great leader. He's got his cups, so really he's, not necessarily chasing cups. I mean, I'm sure he wants one in Anaheim, but for him right now, it is about, money. This was his last big contract, so I'm sure he took advantage of that, full well knowing that it was probably going to be towards that year 3 or 4 of his deal where he probably wouldn't have a shot at another, Stanley Cup run or at least playoff run with Anaheim. So, that's why he got the full no trade clause, just so he can have a little security, hunker down with the family. And so for him, it's really all about, being that leader in the locker room to help bring up these younger guys like Leo Carlsson and Trevor Zegras so that they can be these star players and move this team into the playoffs here in the next year or two.
All right. Well, goodbye, Anaheim. I mean, obviously you've still got another 41 games left to go, whatever it is. Half the season left to go, but you're playing for pride, playing for yourselves, playing for, trying to get better as a unit, as a team, so that next year you don't find yourself in this position halfway through the year already way out of the playoffs. I think that's that on the Anaheim Ducks. 31 points in 44 games and securely out of the playoffs. Only 18 points out of the playoffs. You think they can make a run here?
They're not the St. Louis Blues from a few years ago.
No. Okay, well let's go down the ladder then. We'll head into Chicago, who is probably the most watchable of these three teams, pre-Bedard getting injured, because of Bedard. I mean, none of these three teams have a Bedard. Yes, Anaheim has some really nice, talented players. So does San Jose, but no one has a Bedard. We're all itching to see what he can do and how he progresses throughout the year. Unfortunately, hurt right now, but he'll be back and has been a revelation for Chicago. It hasn't moved the needle in terms of making them a better team, but something to watch for. And my goodness, I think Chicago is set for a huge overhaul at the end of the year with four forwards signed into next year. That's not many. Oh, five with Foligno re-signing. So that's not many signed for next year. There's a ton of UFAs. You got Colin Blackwell, Rem Pitlick, Zach Sanford on defense, Jared Tenorti. There's some guys that they can move. I did hear that Mrazek, who's a UFA, I did see that they are working on an extension, which blows my mind, but they're working on an extension.
Nah, he's played good. I like Mrazek.
This is that. See, Mrazek does this every now and then. He has a good year, and you're like, oh no, see, he's all right. He's all right. mean, he's had what? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 years. 3 years removed from 923 save percentage in 12 games, though. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I guess. I mean, hey, he's been good for Chicago, and sometimes
Good
there's
for
certain
Chicago.
players. There's sometimes there are players that play well for really bad teams. Like they just get tons of shots, and like if there's such minimal pressure for him, right? Like in Toronto, he was terrible because, hey man, you got to stop we are going to make the playoff. We're going to miss the playoffs if you don't play well. In Chicago, it's if you don't play well, we're actually going to benefit. So just go out there and be yourself.
Yeah, and it's weird to me because we talked about John Gibson and a little bit of the goalie market there. He's an asset to me. He's been playing so well in Chicago that I think a lot of teams are looking at it and saying, you know what, we could bring this guy in to be, a good 1B, a good insurance policy in case our 1A goes down, right? So, you could look at a team, like New Jersey we talked about with Gibson. He would be an excellent person to bring in, I think, to try to solidify that goaltending or at least bring in some competition. But you know what? I think, this is a good signing if they're going to get him re-signed for Chicago. I think, I don't really have a lot of faith in their goaltending depth and prospects. So bring him in, let him, play for a couple of years while you figure that out. But if I was Chicago, I would deal him or at least go to him and say, hey, you know what? We're going to sign you in the offseason. We're going to make you a deal. This is what we want to look at.
There's always a place for you here, Peter.
Always a place.
Go to New Jersey.
But yeah, get us a third round pick and a prospect or something, and and help us out a little bit.
I see. The thing is, when it comes to Mrazek, I don't know if you know this, that he's really into BDSM. he loves the choking. So if he goes to a good team, you know exactly what's going to happen.
Oh,
there's no doubt about it. He's a little bit sensitive between the ears.
And if I'm Chicago, I could care less about that. Let him go.
Exactly. Oh, well, yeah.
I mean, let him go and then re-sign him, but
Yeah, but there is something to be said about, let's keep him here. And what are you really going to get for him? Third round pick or something like that?
Try to get a decent prospect. I would anyways, but.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree, but I think also if a guy is like, I want to re-sign here, please don't trade me. I want to re-sign here. I think you probably just re-sign him. If he's someone you want to bring back in the offseason, I think that it maybe isn't worth the headache of like, nah, bro, we're gonna make you move for the next 3 months and you can just come back. We want the third round pick. I think there's a human element to it too, where you're like, let's treat this guy like he's a veteran. He came here and has played well. Let's treat him to that, and that's the route I would take. But I know, Justin, you're more ruthless than I am.
I'm the Vegas route, baby. Just
Yep. When it comes to Chicago, where you've got Tyler Johnson, maybe Zaitsev, Anthony Beauvillier. Do you think that? I know some of these guys are hurt. Is Chicago going to just kind of deal a lot of them, or they traded for Beauvillier? You think they're going to re-sign him? Try to?
To be quite honest, I haven't heard anything with regards to that. Although I will say he's played fairly well for the 15 games he's been healthy for. So there might. I mean, listen, they've got to get to the cap floor somehow, right? And when you have guys like Tyler Johnson, Zaitsev, a lot of big money guys coming off the books, if you can get Beauvillier to sign for 2 years at $3 million a pop, why not have a guy who can play in your second, third line and provide good leadership, right? Because I mean he's a good locker room guy. So you know what I mean. He's in that ripe age at 26, 27. So he's not too old, he's not too young, so he can still provide you something and get him on a short term, low money deal where if you do have to move him, you can get something back in return and at least be able to move him.
Yep. And Chicago is not short of draft picks, 2 first-round picks. They've got Tampa's, and then they've got LA and Vancouver's second along with their own, and then also Ottawa's third. So they've got 7 picks in the first 3 rounds and looking to add to that. I mean, it could be 10 or 11 when all is said and done, headed into the draft. So they definitely are they're in a good place when it comes to compiling assets. So that's another reason why I look at it and I go, you don't really need a trade. a guy who wants to re-sign there because you've got a lot of other options to acquire assets as well. Any final thoughts on the Blackhawks?
I mean, the biggest question for me with this Blackhawks team is, when Connor Bedard comes back, is he going to still be the Calder favorite, right? I mean, that's all I'm concerned with when it comes to this team. I mean, if I'm being honest, it's just Calder watch for Connor Bedard. And so we know, what was it, 6 to 8 weeks he's going to be out. So he's resumed skating. And it's funny, I was on Twitter earlier this week just watching everybody like, oh my gosh, he's back already. It's a miracle. I'm like, bro broke his jaw. He didn't break his legs. He can still skate.
Right. I'm surprised they're not just strapping a face shield on him and and bringing him back. But I guess you're like, what do we really have to bring him back to?
Yeah, sucks for the people that maybe made plans to come, out of town and bought tickets, and now it's like, oh shit, he's not there anymore.
Oh, great, we get to go watch Taylor Radish play.
Ryan Donato.
Yeah, Cole Gutman. Great. Yeah. Well, Chicago is they're doing what they came here to do, and that was lose. So they're doing it, and they're doing it well. And we'll see where it goes. They'll be a big target for the big teams hunting for other players, and it'll be interesting to see. I guess one thing coming out of Chicago is a kind of a side note is Corey Perry. Is he going to sign anywhere? Because he was given the green light by Gary Bettman, even though apparently he didn't need it. But he went to him, said, am I going to get stopped here if I try to sign anywhere? And they said no. So he's basically a free agent, ready to sign somewhere. It'll be interesting to see where he goes, and could be an important piece. Like Corey Perry, as much as we want to it's just Corey Perry. He'll play in the bottom six, but boy, does he make a difference for someone's bottom six.
Yeah, he does. And I think a lot of teams right now, I mean, they're doing their due diligence, right? They're really figuring out what happened, what his, off-ice incident was all about. So, I mean, there's a lot of teams that are going to want a guy like that. So he'll get signed eventually. Just might be a couple weeks.
I thought about it. I was like, could Toronto sign Corey Perry? And I don't know that they could. Because I don't know. It would be like
the media.
Yes, I just don't know if the players on the team would accept him. Like, they've played against him in 3 playoff series. I think every year, like the last 3 years, they've played against Corey Perry in the playoffs with Tampa and Montreal. And I just wonder if it would just be too much animosity towards the guy. Like, they hate the guy. I think it's more likely that Corey Perry signs with the Florida Panthers, and that's who we get round 1.
Florida Panthers make a lot of sense, but what if a guy like Charlie Coyle came from Boston, right? They've had a lot of interesting series against Boston the last couple of years. So would you take a guy like Charlie Coyle if you're Toronto?
Oh yeah. But Corey Perry's a different, and I mean he's the agitator. I wouldn't say that Charlie Coyle is really that way. Like, no. It's fine to play people in the playoffs, but I think there's a special level of hatred for Corey Perry. Like when the Leafs played Chicago, there was some tussle there with Corey Perry. So that's a whole different ball game. But I don't think that the Leafs are a team that are going to sign Corey Perry. Him and Ryan Reeves just don't like each other at all, and so that probably wouldn't be the best idea either.
Nope.
All right. Any final thoughts before we move on to our fun bottom feeder, San Jose?
Trade Taylor Hall.
Trade Taylor Hall. Now that is an interesting thought. 1 year left on his deal. You could even eat half of it, and it's no big deal for next year. Somebody's willing to drop a first-round pick in your lap for Taylor Hall. Are you doing
not a first-rounder, but
no?
Just because the injury history, you're not dropping a first-rounder. But
yeah, but you could easily do we're giving you a second-round pick or a third-round pick that's going to turn into a first-round pick if he plays this many games and we go this far in the playoffs or something like that. That's very
possible. I would do that for Taylor Hall.
Very possible. And shoot, yeah, if you could get him for $3 million and he's playing Taylor Hall on a really good team, he's probably playing on a third line, to be honest. Like I don't.
I mean, he was in Boston last year, right? So
Yep. I think that that's exactly where he probably needs to be. Like, if he were to go, what team? I think what team would a Taylor Hall go to? I could see like the New York Islanders being interested in a Taylor Hall, somebody who could score and could kind of fly up and down your lineup. That's sort of the guy he's become. Is like he can play with really good players, but he can also play uh, kind of a little bit more of a chess match, where hey, he doesn't have to always start in the offensive zone, and he can be relied upon a little bit in that way. But it would be interesting to see if Taylor Hall was dealt, because they definitely brought him in for Bedard, and
Yeah.
I don't know if they'd be willing to deal him at this point because of that fact.
No. I think it's just more on a personal level. I think this summer I want to see him get dealt, but that's just me, just because I want to see him get a shot at a cup.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Chicago, have fun in the ground. We'll see you next season. Like their season's just over. What if you just got so far behind that like all the rest of your games just got canceled? Sorry, guys. We're not gonna worry about it. The team's taking a break. Okay. San Jose Sharks. This is no doubt the worst team of this batch, right? Are we there together? They're just, even though they have avoided becoming the like historically worst team in the history of the league kind of vibe, they are still pitiful and have just been awful. They do have, they're starting to get a few guys back healthy, but Logan Couture is still out, and that of course hurts. What do you see this team doing at the deadline?
Moving a lot of pieces. I mean, they got guys who, in the past have had a lot of success. So there are some teams that could look at guys like Anthony Duclair, Mike Hoffman, Kevin LeBanc, right? These guys who were good a couple years ago, and say, you know what? If in the right situation, the right line mates, they could potentially like a guy like Anthony Duclair, right? I mean, he was pretty good in Florida with Sasha Barkov on that top line. 11 points last year in the playoffs for Florida. So even though he's off to a slow start and not so good start, but you could look at that and be like, you know what? If we bring him in, he could maybe be that 30-goal guy from a couple of years ago. So let's stick him, on our second line with, pretty decent center. Maybe this works out, right? But I don't know. I mean, it could be Anthony Duclair is one of those guys who can play in the left and right wing. So maybe a team like, the New York Rangers, who just can't seem to figure out their right wing situation, maybe they look to bring in a guy like this at, if you eat half the salary, $1.5 million, you can make him work.
Yep. I think that would be, I mean, he's got to be the top target on this team. I think Kevin LeBanc too has really proven that he is a valuable piece, that he's another guy that could just kind of slide up and down the lineup. Only has 7 points in 32 games this year, but I think most would be willing to go, all right, you're on a freaking horrible team. You've been on a horrible team. Can we sort of resurrect you a little bit? I think no matter what, he's going to get moved. I don't think that he stays in San Jose, but he may be the hardest one to move, because even at eating half the salary, he's still at 2.35-ish. So that's a big pill to swallow salary cap wise for somebody who's struggling right now. Oh, that might be a difficult move. But Mike Hoffman too. I mean, he's scored goals before. That he can do it. If your power play is struggling, he's somebody that you could definitely target and throw on that second unit power play, even throw on that top power play and utilize him in that way. So San Jose definitely has some players. The last guy would be Alexander Barabanov, who the thing that interests me about Barabanov, or the guy that he reminds me of a little bit, not because the names are similar, but Ivan Barbashev. The way that he left St. Louis, he goes to Vegas, he fits in perfectly, and it's because he kind of played a role that no one else played on that team, and he fit the style. And I think that Barabanov could be that guy for another playoff team. He could be somebody that can come in decent defensively and make some things happen. And he's young enough to where you could bring him in and you could even re-sign him and keep him around. He's only 26 years old, so not a bad player to have the intention of keeping around as well.
Yeah, not bad. And I will say, to all the negative stuff we've seen with the San Jose team, the one positive I take out of this whole entire disaster of a season for San Jose is they found a couple decent goaltenders. I mean, Kaapo Kähkönen, we kind of had high hopes for him, after last season, the last couple seasons. Thought he could be the next goaltender for San Jose, but last year not so hot, and I think this year he's been fine. But Mackenzie Blackwood was kind of, down and out, right, in New Jersey, and he's kind of come back to form a little bit in San Jose, kind of similar to Peter Mrazek, where, just some guys play better on a bad team, and he kind of found the right situation where he gets to play, and it's worked out. There's no pressure on him to succeed, so he's looked good so far, in my opinion, and I think, obviously he's got another year left on his deal, but if San Jose, really is serious about a rebuild, next season, they could get a good return for a guy like this, or maybe in the offseason.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Goalie market is weird, right? Like it's probably the hardest one to nail down, because you'll get these teams where you're like, you need a goalie so bad, and they're like, we couldn't give up a 3rd round pick for that guy. You're like, why? It's but then they're willing to give up a 1st round pick for like a guy like what Toronto went and gave up a 1st and a 2nd for Nick Foligno, and you're like,
oh my gosh,
why? What did you think this guy was going to do? But then you're not willing. It's a funny thing. The players you're willing to give things up for and not goalie. It just seems like goalies always get the shaft.
Oh yeah,
and they seem to be at playoff time. It's like, oh, all you need is a hot goalie. But then you're like, we don't want to trade for a goalie right now. We'll just stick with who we have. And you're like, yeah, but they've sucked all year long. Oh, all it takes is a hot goalie. And you're like, yeah, so why not go get the hot goalie playing on a garbage team? See if he can be better for you.
Mm-hmm.
For cheap. Always seems like they go for cheap too.
Yep.
All right, yeah, it's Macklin Celebrini is clearly the target for the San Jose Sharks, hoping they finish last, get the hometown boy, and who will go first overall. He's first overall in all the rankings right now for all the prospects. So that is obviously who they're going for, and they are right there. They have 24 points in 45 games, so 10 wins through 45 games, on pace for less than 20 wins on the season. So a pretty rough year for the San Jose Sharks. I think it's the minus 94 halfway through the season that just crushes your soul. It's got to just be so disheartening to be on a team that you're getting, not just losing, you're getting blown out. And I think if I'm a team that's looking for a player to target at the deadline, I'm going to be honest. I'm not targeting any San Jose Shark. None of them. Because I think at this point, most of those players have been losing for so long. Maybe Anthony Duclair, who's only been there for 40 games. I think the rest of them, I just go, I don't want to touch them. Those guys have been losing for too long. They need like a fresh start in the offseason, and I don't want them to come in here. And, you've been playing knowing you're going to lose for the last however many years or games, and then to switch that and go, oh, I need to give my all for the cup. A lot of guys have a hard time with that. So
yeah,
me, I don't want to give up for the worst team in the NHL by far, guys getting blown out and just going, whatever, what can I do? We're getting blown out. It just shows that team doesn't have maybe the heart that you want. You can be a bad team. You can still lose, but also you can exist in this bubble where you play so hard and you're right there. Maybe you're losing 2-goal games, but that's a lot better than 7-goal games.
Yeah, and the problem is a lot of these guys, right? So guys like, Anthony Duclair, Mike Hoffman, they want to be out there. They want to be in there in every situation. They want to play. They want to skate, right? So a lot of these guys, when they get moved, if you end up going to a team like, for example, teams trying to make the playoffs, looking at the West, for example, the Nashville Predators, right? Or, Calgary Flames, for example. If you get moved to a team like that, that's just on the bubble or just in a wild card spot, typically, you're kind of shoved back down in the lineup. You're not going to get a lot of playing time. it's kind of, I don't want to say disheartening, but it's demoralizing a little bit where you're like, okay, cool. I don't really have much to play for.
Yep.
So, great. Maybe I might make the playoffs, maybe not. So, but if you get moved to a team like, Boston or, Vegas, where you've got a legit shot at a cup, you kind of have a little bit something to play for. So I think those situations are a little bit different. But, if you don't really have much to play for, but maybe making the playoffs, it's not going to work out well.
Yeah. That's what. Yeah, I think staying away from some of those guys can, unless it's you've targeted someone who is mentally really tough. I would say that like Giroux, the year that he left Philadelphia, he went to the Panthers, he was ready to go. But you see other times where players just takes them a long time to get going, and maybe they never get going. I would say that I know that there was the injury. I would say that like Patrick Kane was kind of in that a little bit. Like it was like he never really had that fire that you remember from a Patrick Kane years ago. And I know he was injured, but I think that's what you're missing when you're on a bad team. You just don't have that same level of fire. All right. Should we move on to a couple teams that are buyers? I think just given the time that we have left, rather than going to like the obvious, all right, the Colorado Avalanche, they're up contenders. Of course, they're going to be buyers. Let's talk about a couple teams that would surprise you to know that you believe that they are buyers.
Oh, okay.
So I know I'm throwing this question at you without any prep work, but I'll give you mine and give you a chance to think about who might be a surprise buyer, or who is like, wow, I did not think that team would be willing to sell the farm at the beginning of the season, but certainly would be now. I think one team that will be buyers are the Seattle Kraken.
I was just about to say Seattle. I'm glad you mentioned them.
All right. Well, yeah, I think the Kraken, I think we looked at their season last year. They won a playoff round. Amazing. What a turnaround from their first year. Certainly this team is going to be taking strides forward. They had a really rough start to the season. It looked like they were just going to be, last year was maybe a little bit of a fluke, or just, they took 2 steps forward and then take a step back. Now they're on a roll. They're really, really close to the playoffs right now. They are sitting two teams out. They're 47 points, tied with the Calgary Flames, and 2 points back of the Nashville Predators and the Edmonton Oilers. Granted, the Oilers have 4 games in hand on everybody else, so I'm not really counting that. Like, they're going to win at least 2 of those games and be further ahead. But as they have to jump the Flames and the Predators to make the playoffs. I think that's very possible. Suddenly they're in a position to be buyers. And I think they're a unique buyer because they do not want that momentum in Seattle to go away. Like, you need to make the playoffs again.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. For me, this is an easy target because I think they're a team that, they're 6th worst in the NHL in terms of goal scoring. And last year they were the 4th best team. So clearly there's something missing there. There's something a little bit different. Obviously we've talked about it, at previous shows about their, guys, that were on the 4th line, they've moved on. They're scoring elsewhere. Daniel Sprong, for example, in Detroit. But this is an easy, target as far as what you want if you're Seattle, right? You want to go out and find guys that can score goals. Maybe you look at a goaltender, right? I mean, Joey Decord's been looking very, very good this year, and I'm still going to ride him. But maybe I try to find a suitable backup. But
you would want to ride Joey.
I mean, I don't know, but more than anything, I'm going to try to find a top 6 forward that I think can come in and just be a showstopper. It's going to cost you a lot, right? I mean, it's obviously going to cost you your 1st round pick and likely more, but maybe, Pittsburgh's out of it, come deadline, they've kind of bottomed out, and maybe you can somehow convince, Jake Gensel to come on board. Maybe, he's just not willing to sign there or something. And then, so, Pittsburgh's willing to deal him at that point, even though I don't think they would. They're probably going to keep him, but, he could be a guy you could target. Maybe a guy like Sean Monahan, somebody who has a little bit of grit, a little bit of sandpaper to his game. Or even, like I mentioned before, Daniel Sprong in Detroit. He's, put up 11 goals, 28 points. He's looked very, very good in Detroit. But,
I
again,
thought it was going to make the playoffs, Justin.
I think they will too. But again, Detroit is.
They wouldn't trade him if they were in the playoffs.
I don't know. I really don't know.
Here's a name. Now I know he has a full no trade clause. Tarasenko. Things have not gone well for Ottawa. And what if you said to him, "Hey, we'll trade you to Seattle. They're going to be a team that they're going to make the playoffs. You get to go on a little run." He's been playing well enough to where you're going to be willing to give up a first round pick for Tarasenko to come in. I mean, he would immediately. It's funny because Seattle actually could have had him at the. Instead, they took a defenseman from St. Louis in the.
Worked out well, Vince Dunn.
Yes, it worked out very well. It was a really good call.
Yeah,
but I think he's somebody that would be. Yeah, he's not playing bad in Ottawa, but things just aren't going well in Ottawa. And I think that you could just, hey, if he's willing to go, then that would be a great target for Seattle.
Yeah, I agree. And Seattle's a team too where, they've got a lot of really nice prospects, right? So you don't have to really worry about losing that first round pick and drafting somewhere in the middle, 15, 16 spot in the draft, right? You've got your Matty Beniers, you've got your Shane Wright. So you've hopefully solidified, your forward prospect group a little bit better for the future. So you don't have to worry about losing assets or not having them like teams like Pittsburgh or Toronto now, right? Where they don't really have a lot of assets in the cupboards to say, if we get rid of our first round pick, well, we've still got guys coming up that are going to still help us in the future.
Yep, for sure. Do you have any other teams that you've thought of now that I've given you enough time?
Yeah, I actually mentioned them quite briefly with Daniel Sprong there, but I think the Red Wings would not surprise me if they would be buyers at the deadline.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because there was some. I mean, maybe 2 weeks ago it was Patrick Kane I think would be open to going somewhere else, and now it's no, we're not going to trade Patrick Kane.
No,
not unless things
staying.
Really fall. Yeah, he's staying.
They've
been playing really well, and they beat the Leafs. Things have been going really well since it was kind of that Sweden trip. Things kind of went sour there for a minute, and they've been able to rally. So it'll be. I mean, they're not this super young team that people assume that they are. I think they're a rebuilding team. No, they're really they have rebuilt, but they haven't necessarily rebuilt the traditional way of let's go, we'll draft really high. And they have some high draft picks, of course, Seider and Raymond and Joseph Valeno. They have players that are playing for them that they drafted. But a lot of these guys, it's almost like they've done it the Vegas way. Let's go out and sign these free agents and let's go out and piece this thing together. Let's draft, but let's also look at the free agent market. Let's make some trades. And they really have kind of piecemealed this together, similar to the Florida Panthers too. Florida Panthers really hardly drafted any of the players that were on their cup run team outside of Barkov and Ekblad. And it's just you don't have to only build through the draft, and Yzerman's done a really nice job. Now, do I think this is a team that's going to do what Florida did? No. I don't think they're going to the Stanley Cup Finals by any stretch of the imagination. I think they're a first round loss if they make the playoffs, but I don't think that it's going to be an easy out. I don't think they're going to lose in 4 games. So, yeah, I mean, I'd love to see the Red Wings buy, but do you think the Red Wings are going to buy someone that's a UFA at the end of the year?
No, yes and no. I think, yes, they want to go out and get, younger players that are going to have a little bit more team control and that they can re-sign and that kind of thing. But at the same time, I think, they might be right on that border where they say, you know what, we have a really good feeling about this guy. We think he's going to fit in very, very well with this team. And so, you know what, win or lose, let's just bring him in anyways. And, I know, Tampa Bay is going to be there at the end. They're going to be a bubble team. But if Steven Stamkos isn't going to get a deal, if, Tampa Bay is a little bit out of it, if they start to falter and fall out a little bit, Steve Yzerman is very familiar with that team and a lot of those players. So wouldn't a guy like Steve Stamkos just be a lightning bolt to catapult Detroit into the playoffs, regardless if you think they can actually get past the first round or not. I think for the fans of Detroit, similar to what we saw with the Detroit Lions, just winning a playoff game, just getting in right now at this point would mean so much to this franchise and these fans that they've been waiting for. I think they're the second longest playoff drought behind the Buffalo Sabres right now.
That's crazy to think, especially because they made the last 30 years in a row. The one flaw in your plan, I suppose, is Julian Breezebois saying we will absolutely not trade Steven Stamkos, no matter what happens. We're not trading Steven Stamkos. So there is that.
I think that's more of a possibility than them actually being willing to trade them. But again,
if Stamkos said, "If you're not going to sign me, then I want to be traded," then okay, then I think it could still happen. I think he's coming out. He's doing some damage control, right? Like obviously, there's something going on behind the scenes. Why isn't Tampa Bay? I guess Tampa Bay has kind of said we're going to evaluate this at the end of the year because they don't want to commit beyond this year because maybe they're unsure as to what they have throughout the rest of the lineup or. I don't know. I don't know why this is a difficult decision for them. But maybe Stamkos goes, I mean, if this is how you're going to play it, I just want to go play for the cup somewhere else then. I don't know if I can see that happening either. It's a weird situation, though. It really is. He said it early in the season where it's like, you take care of all these other guys. Look at the guys they took care of. Kucherov, Point, Sorelli, Nicholas Paul, even, like Brandon Hagel. Eric Chernak, and you're not willing to sign Steven Stamkos to like a 3-year extension. It's a pretty big no-brainer in my mind. And the guy's already taken a freaking pay cut at $8.5 million to sign with you. If I were him, I'd say, yes, I'll re-sign, but I'm not taking a discount this time. I took a discount. Now it's my turn to get paid. I'm getting my 12 million or my 11 million or whatever it is.
Yeah, but I do think, outside of Stamkos, I think the other big name player that I've looked at for this team and thought about, obviously Detroit's got Mo Seider on the right side, but they really lack a true number one left wing or left D guy. If the Wings could do a sign and trade with Calgary to bring in Noah Hannafin and get him signed on that 8-year contract extension, oh, buddy.
Giving up a first plus.
Absolutely. And they could give up guys like, Joe Veleno, Robbie Fabry.
Joe Veleno. I don't think that's going to cut it for Hannafin. I think you're talking Marco Kasper.
I might pull that trigger. I really would.
Straight up a Marco Kasper and a second-round pick for Noah Hannafin.
I would even give up a first-rounder with Kasper for him. Maybe not this year's first, maybe a 2025 or 26, but yeah, I would do it because again, you know what? Jake Wallman's been great, but he's not a true number one left side defenseman. And so you want to bring in a guy who's going to, I think Simon Edvinsson is going to be ready to go next year and be on this team, but I don't want to rush him in and say, you have to save that left side of the D, just like Mo had to come in and save the right side. I don't think they're comparable players. I think they play a different style of game. So I think giving Edvinsson time to, be on that third or second pair and not have to rush him into that first pairing would be very, very valuable, especially if you get a guy like Hannafin who's right in his prime and ready to compete.
Yep. No, the move makes all the sense in the world. I guess the downside is that if we're looking out 3 years, would the Red Wings regret trading Kasper?
Now, they've got another center and Nate Danielson, who I think is going to wind up being a better two-way, kind of center, which is what they drafted both of these guys hoping they would do. I think Kasper has a little bit more offensive upside, but with I think with who they have signed right now, Nate Danielson's it if they want to compete, in the next few years. I think Kasper is more than, a valuable asset that they're willing to move.
Okay. I'm going to throw 2 more teams at you to close out the teams that I would choose that are surprise buyers. I'm going Pittsburgh and Washington, both outside the playoffs right now, both really playing kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. It's funny. They have the same exact record, 21, 15, and 6. They, however, have played drastically different games. You don't have to look further than the goal differential. Pittsburgh, a +16. They're the only team, I believe, in the NHL outside of the Arizona Coyotes who are outside of the playoffs with a plus goal differential. And Arizona's only a +2. Pittsburgh's a +16. We've got Washington at a -24. I think it kind of speaks to some of Pittsburgh's gotten a little bit unlucky. Washington has gotten lucky at times. They've been winning close games when they win and losing like more blowouts. But I think both these teams have to be looking and going, I mean, we have nowhere to go but be buyers. There's just no reason not to be. I think Washington is in a much better place than they were last year. You know, Washington has 2 games in hand on Tampa. They can easily be in the playoffs, and they're right there. They have to make the playoffs. You've got to make these games meaningful, and I think you've got to look at this and go, we got to target a goal scorer who maybe or a different setup man, like a pass first centerman who can help Ovechkin. Like this team should be targeting someone who can come in and help Ovechkin, whether it's another goal scoring winger to take pressure off of him, because I mean there's no one there. So you just put all your effort into stopping Ovechkin, you're going to stop the Capitals for the most part scoring goals. So they either need that setup centerman that can play with them, or a winger who can kind of work his own line and can take that tension away from Ovechkin. And I think those players are out there, but Washington's going to have to be able to go, hey, even though we're not great, let's get into the playoffs. Like they're kind of in that Detroit Red Wings mode in like 2013, 14, where you're like, oh, we're trading another first round pick, but we're going to lose in the first round again. Doesn't matter. You got to give Ovechkin as many cracks at the playoffs as you can. Worry about being the worst team in the league in 3 years. That's fine. You can deal with that. Get into the playoffs if you're Washington. Same goes for Pittsburgh. Very similar argument. Just Pittsburgh has to get into the playoffs, and I don't think now is the time to not go after a good player to help solidify this roster. Pittsburgh's more of like they need some depth. So they maybe don't have to spend a first round pick. They could spend their second, third, fourth, and figure out a way to do it. But Washington, I think they need to go for broke. They need to go out and get somebody who can help Ovechkin.
Yeah, I think you're trying to move Kuznetsov maybe, and see if you can't, make a 1-for-1 swap and maybe throw a second round pick in there with him or something. Maybe a team who has a UFA centerman who they think, okay, we're probably not going to re-sign him, or he's probably going to go elsewhere. But if we bring in Kuznetsov, now we've got a guy around for another year, maybe a fresh start. He gets back to, a little bit of where he was a few years ago, and maybe gives, somebody else another fresh start and an opportunity to play with Ovechkin, because they've got Dylan Strome there, and he signed for a few more years, 4 years after this season. So they've got a number, 1 center, number 2 center, wherever you want to throw him, and find somebody else to dish the puck to a guy like Ovechkin and Max Pacioretty. So take advantage of those guys while you have them.
Yep, 100%. There's one player who I'd be curious about. He's got a lot of time left on his deal, and he's having a good season. I wonder how Philadelphia feels about Sean Couturier right now. Does he fit into the long term of like 3 years down the road? Are you going to have the same Sean Couturier right now? Could you
he's a John Torch guy
to deal him? Yeah, that's true. He would help a playoff team so much. But no one can do that right now. Even if it was a possibility at 7.7, it wouldn't happen. But that's where maybe somebody more like a Scott Laughton. He does have time left on his deal, but somebody like that who's a little bit cheaper, younger, could come in and help to solidify that. But anyways, there's a few surprise buyers, and we'll keep on getting into this as the trade deadline approaches. I believe it's like March 8th or March 11th, something like that.
March 11th, I believe. Yeah,
it is March 8th. It is a Friday.
Ooh.
Actually, this year. Usually it's like a Monday, isn't it?
Yeah, typically. Yeah.
Well, there you go. March 8th. So we're 7 weeks away from that. So we're close. Justin, any final thoughts before we sign off on our first, I'll say like 0.5 video episode, since I was only here for, you can only see your face really for the majority of this, but
Yeah, charge your camera.
I will.
I love
know,
it.
Shame. All right. Well, that's our show. You can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Until next week, we will talk to you later.